think about the series that we are on right now. And there's a couple conversations I had with people this week. It really resonated with my heart because of what we're talking about. And it was like not coincidental, but God coincidence, you know what I mean? That I was talking to people and they were using words like, I need to be restored in my life. I had another person say, I want something in my life that's going to rebuild my life, the foundation of. So I just heard these words, rebuild, restore, revive, over and over and over. These are the 3 words that God gave me a few weeks ago, before I even went on vacation. And so God's been confirming it in my heart, what needs to be done. And of course I start a series and it's the 4th of July weekend, so everybody's gone, you know what I'm saying? But I think it's a good illustration about what God's going to do in this community, in this community of faith and the surrounding communities. Because as you read through Nehemiah, if you've been a Christian for a long time, you probably read Nehemiah somewhere. I'm assuming that, right? Or you know the story. It's a pretty simple story, but it's one of those stories that if you read it for face value, it's about the walls of Jerusalem being rebuilt. And so if you read it from face value, you go, what's the big deal, right? I mean, anybody do it like rebuilding houses, kind of TV shows and stuff like that? I love that. I think for one day of our vacation it was raining, and what was that we were watching? Flip or Flop or something like that, and it was a rebuilding type of show. We watched it all day, and it gave me good ideas and how much it costs to do that kind of stuff. But when it comes to, like, if someone was going to rebuild a wall and they were going to, like this wall right here, if we're going to rebuild it, and if I was watching on TV, I would just as much want to watch paint dry, right, if it's just one wall. So if you read it and it's like a big whoop, Pastor, we're reading about a wall being built. But I want you to see, if you read it, you'll see the parallel in the church. When I mean the church, I mean capital C, the church in America, not just this congregation, but the church. Because you're going to see a community of believers. You're going to see the people of God who are discouraged. You're going to see people of God who are serving. They're not serving God. They're kind of going this way or that way. And the whole city of Jerusalem is in ruins. And this is as close as I get to get some ruins. I had some of these out over in the back over here. And so we brought some in here because this represents the wall being kind of torn down. It's not complete. Okay? And I love the story of Nehemiah. I'm just curious if has anybody read Nehemiah? Say everybody. And so it's not going to be a brand new thing. When you read it again, you're going to go, okay, I know the story. But you're going to see little nuggets of truth being dug out from the truth, what Nehemiah is. He's not just rebuilding a wall. He's seeing God rebuild a people. He's seeing people restore their confidence. He's seeing people restore their faith. He's seeing people restore their joy. He's seeing people restore their peace. And they're turning back to God. And it just so happens to be a wall that they're building that is kind of an illustration. It's truly happening, but it's an illustration of something deeper. Okay? How many of us know if you're in Jerusalem and you see these walls being torn down, and they're torn down, and the temple is destroyed, it's going to make you mad. It's going to get you discouraged, correct? You're going to be in a constant state of discouragement until you see it built up. And here's a little, if you've ever been in Bible quiz, how long did it take the wall of Jerusalem to be rebuilt in Nehemiah's day? It was a miracle, by the way. 52 days. The entire wall of Jerusalem. 52 days. That's a miracle. But not only is it a miracle that God, it wasn't just a God thing. People, they tied up their bootstraps, and they all did their part. Everybody who lived at certain parts of the wall, they were in charge of that part of the wall, right? They were in charge of that part of the wall. And if someone did their part, as long as everyone did their part, the wall was rebuilt, and it was a miracle, but not only a supernatural miracle. I'm not talking even about supernatural. I'm just talking about where 2 or 3 are gathered together. Usually there's chaos and there's disagreement and there's that kind of thing. But in those days where 2 or 3 are gathered together, it was something powerful. The wall of Jerusalem was rebuilt. Their faith was rebuilt. There was restoration. There was a revival that happened as soon as the wall was starting to be built. They started to see something bigger. And that's why I'm excited. I can't be more excited than this series. I put on Facebook that it's probably the most important sermon series I'll ever preach here. Okay, if I'm here 10, 20, 30 more years, whatever, this will be probably the most important series that I've ever done because of just how lives are and how this community is and what the community has faced, what our church has faced, that kind of thing. It's vital. And of course, I started on the weekend that everybody's gone. But that's why we're recording it, okay? And so I'll put it online and that kind of stuff. But are you guys ready to go in Nehemiah? And I already preached kind of, and I wasn't even, now I'm starting with my notes. And so if you can't find Nehemiah, it's between Ezra and Esther, if that helps. Before Job, before Psalms, if that helps. If not, it'll be on the screen. We'll read it from the NIV. If it's different in yours, that's okay. But I want to, before we begin the book of Nehemiah, I want to say something. That if you consider yourself the best of anything, the best looking, anybody here think you're the best looking? I do. I'm better than my twin brother, but that's what she tells me. My wife tells me. She has to say that. It would be very weird if she said the opposite. But if you were when you were in high school, you were the star athlete. Anybody were the star athlete? You were the starting quarterback. Or if you're a female and you were dating the starting quarterback. Anybody there? No. If you were, in the yearbooks you had like the best whatever, and you were the best. You were the most likely to succeed. Anybody had that when you were a senior? Anybody class clown? Anybody like me and you didn't get anything? You're like, yeah, that's my award. You just were overlooked. And see, I like that everybody's like, I'm not the best at anything. I like that because even if you were the starting quarterback in high school, even if you were the prom queen, who I talked to at someone at the store, and they were like, when I was in high school, I was the prom queen. I go, why are you telling me this? What do I care? That's 2 deduction points based on my view of you now. It's less. I view less of you now. No, I don't. But if you were that, God can still use you. But if you read the Bible from cover to cover, or just randomly pick a story in the Bible, one of the narratives, what you will find is that God specializes in using ordinary people. They're people that you would not pick out of a crowd. Like King David, we all know the story that his dad didn't even go out and get him. He wasn't even a choice. He's like, he's just a young punk that's up in the, he's taking care of the sheep, he's taking care of this, and he's too young. And so I'm not even going to pick him. So if you just randomly pick any person in the Bible, anyone, they're going to be ordinary. Obviously, you have people who are prophets, and you have kings, and you have teachers, and you have preachers, and you have all that kind of stuff. But the average person in the Bible and who God's used were ordinary people. And I look in the mirror, and I look ordinary. When it comes to being a pastor, when it comes to being a preacher, when it comes to being a spiritual man of God, I'm ordinary. There's no one that would say, wow, you're going to be you're like the MVP preacher or whatever. It's not that. And that's good because God wants to use ordinary people. Anybody ordinary here? Anybody want to be used by God in extraordinary ways? I do. And that's why this series is such a powerful series. I put it on Facebook twice, and I get nervous when I put some on Facebook. This is the most important series. Now I have to really work hard to make sure that's true. Okay? Because I don't want you walking there going, boy, that was pretty dumb. Anyway, but Nehemiah is pretty easy to read and get excited. But we're going to look at a guy named Nehemiah. Who was Nehemiah? He was not a king. He was not a prophet like of the Old Testament. He was not a priest. He was not a warrior. He was not what we would call the strongest man of God. He was a cupbearer. Okay, you ever heard that term before, cupbearer? Right? He was a glorified butler. He was a glorified waiter. Nehemiah, and not only that, you think that would be a great, job to work for the king and the king's family, right? And all you have to do is serve him wine. You have to serve him the best wine. You have to bring it to him and his family. Wouldn't that be an easy? I would love that. You get to live with the in the castle and all that kind of stuff. Wouldn't that be cool? But here's the difficult part. Do you know that the cupbearer also had to bring the wine in front of the king and his family and drink out of it first? Why would he have to do that? Because it was poison, right? This is an illustration, but I need it because my throat's dry. There we go. But see, if he dropped dead, the king would know it's poisoned, and the king would live, and Nehemiah would be dead. Pretty good job, right? So you're working for the President of the United States of America, and you go to President Obama and you say, here's your Pepsi, sir. I'd say sir because he's the president, but here's the Pepsi, and you go, hey, you go drink it. And I go, okay. He'd wait a few seconds. Okay, he's alive. Okay, here you go. And so that was his job. It was a glorified butler. It was a glorified waiter. But in all likelihood, the only reason they had that job was so that the king would not be poisoned. That was the only reason why he was there. And that's his entire job. Now think about this. Nehemiah, his family was from Jerusalem originally, so he's 1,000 miles away in modern-day Iran. And he's stuck in what I would call a menial job, kind of like, I'm working for a king, but I'm not doing anything, quote, important. I'm not a prophet. I'm not a king. I love King David. I love Solomon, but I'm not like them. I'm not a priest. I don't offer sacrifices. I'm just doing an ordinary job serving King Artaxerxes, and at some point, probably this will be poisoned. I'll probably die, maybe. You know what? That's exactly who God used to transform Jerusalem in 52 days. 52 days! You have the entire city of Jerusalem in ruins. In 52 days, it's rebuilt. The wall's rebuilt. Now, I like to think if this town was in ruins, 52 days would be the minimum for just meetings to plan on how we're going to do this. Right? Have you ever been part of meetings? You're having a meeting of a meeting. You're planning a meeting. You're having a meeting that's planning a meeting that's planning a meeting ahead in the next 3 months. And then you get there and it's another meeting to get, when's the work going to start? In 52 days, the entire walls of Jerusalem, the people are rebuilt. There's restoration, and they're revived. And I like to think, as I'm reading this week, Nehemiah 1 and 2, I like to see the parallel between then and now. That's a long time ago. In fact, Nehemiah, the story of Nehemiah was at 444 BC, 444 years before Jesus was sent to this earth, and God the Father sent his Son to this earth. Nehemiah showed up. So that's a long time from now. So as we read this, as we study this, I want you to see the obvious parallels between today and then, because this story is not just a story to look at history book and go, wow, congratulations, Nehemiah, you did good. This is a story about here and now. This is a story about you and me. This is a story about Kamiah and Kuski and the surrounding communities. This is a story about this church. This is a story about the church down the road. This is a story about the churches around this community. That's what this story is really about. And I'm excited about it, if you can't tell already. And so let's start in Nehemiah chapter 1. And for simply, we'll just start with verse 1. And let's read that. It says, and this is NIV, so yours might be a little bit different. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa. Okay? You're like, what's that? Okay, you already lost me, Pastor. What's going on here? That's not powerful. Okay, just for some context, because context is everything when you read the scripture. Kislev, you'll not find that in your calendar. Surprise, surprise. So Kislev was around the end of November and the beginning of December. So it's around the time that we start putting up Christmas trees. But they wouldn't do that back then because that's before Jesus was born. That's the time when you start decorating the church and putting all kind of red flowers and what are those things that usually poinsettias or setas? Whatever it's called. I don't know. That's anyway. But he's in Kislev, and it's in the 20th year while I was in the citadel of Susa. Again, Susa is in modern-day Iran. That's far from Jerusalem. That's far from where God has intended you to be. That's far from being what God would call the promised land, correct? He's outside of the Old Testament promised land. He's over away from it, and he's far away from it. And so he's kind of throwing out this idea that I am not where I'm supposed to be, apparently. Okay? In the 20th year, I was actually just in the citadel of Susa. And then, verse 2. Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men. Okay, so pause right there. So some guys are coming back from the area, because some people went back to the area, Jerusalem. They were in exile for years and years and years and years. And some people went back there. Some people stayed in exile. Some people stayed away from the promised land. And Nehemiah was one of them, but his brothers were the one that went back to Jerusalem. Does that make sense? And so they're back visiting, and he says, I questioned them about the Jewish remnant. Say remnant. There's not much left, right? That's what a remnant is. There's a core group. There's a little bit. There's just a spark. It's not a big, huge forest fire, but it's a spark, a remnant, just something that it's lasting, but you know what? It's a shadow of its former self, right? That's what a remnant really is. And that had survived the exile. And also, I asked them about Jerusalem. Hey, how's Jerusalem? How's the capital? How is God's city? How's it doing? Can you tell me the truth? Now, remember how important Jerusalem is to the people of God. We look at it and go, okay, it's a city, but rebuild, do all that. But this represented everything. Okay, they had the temple there, right? And it was destroyed. What's the temple? It's everything. It's not just a church. We can go anywhere for church. We can have the presence of God everywhere. But they believed that you had to you had to go to the temple, and that's where the presence of God dwelt. When you tear that down, it's easy to think that God doesn't care about us anymore. We have nowhere to go for God. So think about their relationship with God. It's broken. Okay? So they said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province, look up here. So think about that. People have been there for a while. They survived it. They should be excited, right? What's the condition of them? Well, they're in great trouble and disgrace. It's been a long time. They're in great trouble still, and they're in great disgrace. They have done nothing to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. They have kind of rebuilt the temple, but it's a shadow of its former self. Okay? And so it's a disgrace. And Jerusalem, the wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and the gates have been burned with fire. Okay? It's broken down. There's been fire. You can't really just sit there and repair it unless a lot of work. Okay? Now, has there ever been anything in your life that's been too difficult to rebuild, so you kind of wash your hands of it, and you're like, I'll just kind of turn my head the other way and ignore it, out of sight, out of mind, of anything. Sometimes when the work is way too hard, it's easy just to ignore it and go, I'm not going to let it bother me. I'll just keep living like I'm supposed to. Maybe somebody will come along and rebuild it for me. And maybe they start getting greedy, and they start going, maybe somebody do it for me. I won't have to do it. I don't want to do it. I'm too depressed. I'm too discouraged. I'm too upset. I'm too broken. Whatever you want to call it, I'm going to wait for someone else, a superhero, to show up and rebuild the walls. I'm going to wait for the right man of God, the right woman of God to rebuild the temple. Because the temple that we have kind of rebuilt is a shadow of its former self. It's not good. It's ugly. It's a disgrace. So that is what's going on. What is the condition of Jerusalem? I forgot verse 4. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and I fasted and I prayed before the God of heaven. Can't forget that verse, of course. Okay, so what was the condition of Jerusalem? It's kind of small here, but obviously the condition of Jerusalem, there was great trouble. It was a disgrace. It was humiliating. Think about that for just a moment, the condition of Jerusalem in the glory days. Think about it when David was such an important figure, an important king, and then when Solomon was the one that built the temple and it was glorious. They used the best of the best, right? And they had a place to go. It was the promised land. And then think of the condition of it then, right there. It's embarrassing. And then the walls were broken down. The gates were burned with fire. Now, before we go on to the reaction, how would you react? How would you react? And before we answer that, think about this. The walls have been destroyed for 144 years. Now, I like to live in the present, so that's like the walls of Jerusalem being torn down in 1872, and it's still torn down. So just think about that for just a moment. If you live in Jerusalem in 1872 and someone destroyed it, and then today, at this moment, the people of God, it's still in ruins, how many of us would be really happy about that? How many of us, it would be embarrassing? How many of us, at the least, we would go, I'm depressed, I'm discouraged? Or you would start declaring, it's never going to change, right? Wouldn't you? After 144 years of no change, I would start saying, there's not going to be any change, right? And so that is, discouragement would be the least thing happening inside people. Probably at the most, it would be an embarrassment to show people the city of God. Here's Jerusalem, such an important place, such important history. And it's an embarrassment. It's a remnant. It's a shadow of its former self. And if we could just get to where we were, if we could just rebuild, if we could just restore, if we could just see revival, things would be great. But you know what? I'm too discouraged to do anything about it. Have you ever been so depressed or discouraged? You can't do anything to help anything in your situation or anyone else's situation. You just want to crawl up in a ball and go into bed. And that's it. You're happy to stay in bed. Hey, I stayed in bed. I feel like I accomplished a lot. Right? I mean, so how would I react? Pastor Joel, maybe not Pastor Joel, let me throw that out. Joel, William Bremer, the first, because Lydia wouldn't have a junior. I would be discouraged and depressed and down, and I'd be like, well, I'm done. I wash my hands of this mess, and it's not my responsibility. How come no one else is doing anything about it? Again, I'm not the pastor. I'm just a regular Christ follower, and which I am anyway, an ordinary. I just wash my hands of the mess. No one else has lifted a finger, so I'm not going to do it myself. Isn't that what you would do? No one else is doing anything. Why should I start it? Why should I be the person that's starting this whole thing and getting this thing rebuilt, restored, and renewed? Why am I the one? How come he won't? How come she won't? How come they won't? What if I'm the only one? But you know what? Nehemiah, there it is. Nehemiah, how was his reaction? He wept. That's an easy reaction when you're really concerned about what's going on. When you see the condition of something so precious as Jerusalem, if it doesn't affect you, check your pulse. Check your heart. If you can see the condition of something so glorious as Jerusalem and it does not move you, go like this and go, nope, no heartbeat. I don't feel anything. If you can't look at that, if you can't see that, the condition of this, what it used to be, and you have all the stories of David and Solomon, and you have all those stories, and then you look at the present condition, and if you can honestly do, oh, well, I don't really care, you're probably dead. At least spiritually. He wept. He mourned. He fasted. He prayed. Here's a super spiritual answer to this, or question to it. What else was there that he could really do right at that moment? There was nothing that he could have done. He could have went from where he was at to Jerusalem. It would have taken him a long time. He could have just abandoned what his job was. He never did that. He could have just did what he could do. He didn't have to pray. He didn't have to, and nothing would have taken place. Nothing would have been solved. Nothing would have been fixed. It would have stayed like it was. But he was a man of God. Ordinary man, but he was a man of God. He wept. He mourned. He fasted. And he prayed. I cannot minimize the importance. I should not minimize the importance of these four things. When it comes to the condition of maybe the church, when it comes to, maybe not, all I hear is all great things in other countries. When it comes to the condition of the church in America, I'm talking about capital C. It should be this. We should respond like this. Now, I'm not a doom and gloom kind of guy. Not usually. Sometimes I am. When it comes to the church, God has built my faith up because it's His church. It's His church, right? It's not my church. It's not your church. It's God's church. And so He's going to build, He will build His kingdom. He will do what He wants to do, okay? But we have a choice to make. Are we going to sit and kind of expect God to do everything? Or are we going to be like a Nehemiah? And we're going to allow this, are we going to allow some of the things in our life to react this way? Are we going to weep? Are we going to mourn? Are we going to fast? Are we going to pray? Because when you start doing those things, when you start doing the things that Nehemiah did, guess what? You start getting the results that Nehemiah got. When you don't do what Nehemiah got, you won't get the results that Nehemiah got. You'll get results, but they won't be those results. Okay? You'll get some results. Now, a remnant of the people of God went back to Jerusalem. They saw that it was horrible. They decided to wash their hands of the mess. They went, I can't do anything. I'm too discouraged. They went to Nehemiah, and Nehemiah got a burden. I mean, have you ever been told something or saw the condition of something, and something inside your spirit just started turning, and just started burning, and you're like, there's something has to be done. For him, it was the wall of Jerusalem, because the whole nation was distraught. It was discouragement everywhere. There was depression. People were like, oh, well, until one man, an ordinary cupbearer, not a priest, not a strong man of God, even though he wasn't one of the best. He wasn't a prophet. He wasn't a pastor, whether that's not even important, but he wasn't that. He wasn't a pope. He wasn't any of that. He was an ordinary cupbearer who he had what I call a Popeye moment. You remember Popeye? Anybody watch the cartoon Popeye? Admit it, come on. You watched it yesterday, right? It's on YouTube anyway. Remember Popeye? Popeye was amazing. His arms were infinitely bigger than his legs, right? I mean, that's weird. But he had a girlfriend. She wasn't that good looking, to be honest, so I don't know what. Anyway, that's kind of mean. But Olive Oyl, remember her? Her legs were like that thin. Like, what's going on with the legs? And then he had an enemy. Who was the enemy? Brutus. Remember that? He was this tough-looking guy. And Brutus, I don't know what the deal was but with Olive Oyl, but Brutus wanted Olive Oyl. So Brutus would steal Olive Oyl, remember that? And then he took Olive Oyl and kept her prisoner or whatever, and he had her. And Popeye, finally, what would he do when he saw that? He would put his foot down, and what would he eat to make him stronger? Spinach. I'm still trying to do the spinach thing, and it doesn't do the instant work like it does for him. He popped the can open. He threw it up in the air. Not the can, but it went up. Remember that? And he went, whoop. And then when he started, the animation kind of moved around. He was strong. His muscles would instantly get big like that. But he said something that's famous, okay? And here's a picture. He says, "That's all I can stands. I can't stands no more." You remember that? Maybe not. You haven't seen it a lot, huh? That's what he used to say. He would say, because when suddenly he says, "That's all I can stands. I can't stands no more." Then what would he do? He'd get up to Brutus, and he would go, right? And Brutus, who was a big guy, right, wasn't he? He was not a small guy. And he'd go down like he was just, an ant. And then Olive Oyl, and they lived happily ever after. I don't know why it was worth fighting over, but you know what? She's a cartoon character. I'll give her that. But it was the moment, this is silly, I know, I'm trying to be funny here, but it was the moment that Popeye said, "That's all I can stand. I can't stand no more," that something took place. Some would say it was the spinach. I'd like to think that it wasn't, because the spinach, I've tried to eat spinach, and it doesn't make me strong instantly, okay? And I've tried Wheaties, and I've tried not eating ice cream. It just doesn't work. So I just eat the ice cream and the sugary cereal, like the Lucky Stars or whatever, Lucky Charms. But Lucky Stars is the cheap one. But you know what? Actually, you know what? It's funny that Nehemiah basically, in a spiritual sense, said the same thing. When he heard about the condition of the wall being torn down, he had a Popeye moment. I really believe it. He wouldn't talk like that, but he'd say, you know what? I can't stand it any longer. This is not right. The condition of the walls in Jerusalem being down for that long, that's not right. And I'm not going to wait for anyone else. Somebody has to do something, and that somebody might as well be me, right? I mean, that's the fact that I want us to remember that. You know, I can't stand it any longer. Think about the underlying part. Somebody has to do something, and that somebody might as well be me. Now, wait a minute. That's not the ordinary way of the church, right? It's just not. I mean, I didn't grow up in the church. I started going to church in 1996, and from that moment, there was always a remnant, if you will, who would do this. But everybody else says, you know what? I can't stand any longer. You do it. Or pastor or leader or board member or worship leader, you know, I have this burden, but can you do it? God has given me this burden, and we ought to be doing this, and I just can't do it, though, but you can do it. You know? And Nehemiah was different. See, he was not a pastor. He was not a board member. He was not on the worship team. He was an ordinary cupbearer that drank wine in front of the king and gave it to him. He was a butler. And he said, somebody has to do something, and that somebody might as well be me. I'm not going to wait for the person over here. I'm not going to wait for the person over there. I'm not going to wait for the people out there. I'm not going to wait for the people who are not here. I'm going to do it. I'm going to see that the walls of Jerusalem are going to be rebuilt. I'm going to see that there's restoration. I'm going to see that there's a revival. I'm going to do what it takes. I'm going to pray. I'm going to seek the face of God. I'm going to worship. I'm going to fast. I'm going to mourn. I'm going to weep. It's been 3 weeks since I preached. I'm sorry. No, I'm not. But, you know, there's so much pent-up sermon in me that, look out. Somebody has to do something, and that somebody might as well be me. And you know what? That was contagious when he got back to Jerusalem. That spirit, that Popeye spirit, I know that's not very spiritual, but that Popeye spirit, you know what? I can't stand it no longer, so I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to roll up my sleeves. And so what you have in the book of Nehemiah, you will find an ordinary guy who draws a line in the sand, and he dares to cross that line and says, that's it. No going back any longer. We can't, as a city, we cannot go back. We've got to move forward. I don't care. I mean, there's the glory days were there, and that's great to think about. But the current condition of Jerusalem is not okay. It's not okay. So we need to see God revive us. We need to see God restore us. We've got to see God rebuild us. And it's not just talking about this place. I'm talking about this country, this community, the people. Okay? Now, I want to look at 3 principles really quick that will show us how God is going to use ordinary people. How does God use ordinary people? Well, they're fairly simple, but they mean everything. Okay? And we've already read the story, so it's the ordinary people who are going to change the world. They're going to sit down to cry. I don't mind crying in front of people. The very first time I ever saw my dad cry when my mom died. He wouldn't cry in front of me when I was growing up, even when I was in college. Even when we went there just to visit. Even if he was dealing with something, he would not cry. At least he wouldn't show me. And the moment that when I got to see him after my mom died, he was broken. And just by seeing him do that, I think something changed between us in a good way. I was like, man, good, because I need to see that as his son. And you know what? We cannot be afraid. This is not just sitting down and crying, just that's it. We're talking about allowing our hearts to be bothered by what is bothering God. Letting something change us and not just turning a blind eye towards things, but going, man, that really bothers me. Because when you truly have something that touches your emotions like that, you're more likely you're going to do something about it. If you turn a blind eye and it doesn't touch your heart, doesn't touch your emotions, you probably won't do anything about it. You'll just, what's the big deal? That's why it's easy to ignore the needs of other countries a lot of times. Well, those kids that don't have good drinking water, well, I can't really see them die, so what's the big deal? right? It's so easier to, when you turn the channel, you remember the channels where if you send in money that they'll get fresh drinking water, and it's easy just to flip the channel. I don't want to see that, right? Then, well, now I'm thirsty, let me get something to drink, and something to eat. And when you see something, when you allow your heart and your emotions to be touched, something's going to go on inside. And that's what happened with Nehemiah. It started there, okay? His first reaction was, in verse 4, it says, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. That doesn't seem very spiritual, but it very is much spiritual. In fact, Jesus was a man who wept a lot. Okay, the very famous verse, Jesus wept, was probably the most well-known. Jesus wept, but that wasn't the only time he wept. In fact, I found it hidden in Hebrews. In Hebrews 5, 7, and 8, it mentions Jesus, about a man that his prayers were full of mourning and his prayers were full of weeping. In fact, it says, during the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears. Why would Jesus, when he's crying to his Father and he's praying to his Father, why would he pray with tears in his eyes? Why would it be fervent cries and tears? Because his heart was touched by the needs of the people. Remember when he said, they're like sheep without a shepherd? Do you think that impacted his emotions? Do you think that impacted him so much that he had to do something about these lost people? Yes. It's not because he was the Son of God because he had to. He's not a robot. He was impacted because his emotions were touched. I love that. It's hidden in Hebrews, but it talks about, it really is weeping. The idea of fervent cries is a weep. It's the snot dripping type of weeping. It's the, I don't care what I look like, and I don't wear makeup, but if you ladies have ever cried and all the makeup's running, what's that stuff you put in your eye? Not in your eye, but that mascara? Yeah. I don't know. How am I supposed to know? That black stuff. Yeah. Or that blue stuff that some people put right there. But it starts dripping down the face. Have you ever seen that? If I come into church and I see some lady with they've had a good time with God. Right? If I see, like snot and blowing the nose, where's that? If I see people using these, you know you've had a good time with God. Or that you just have a cold. I don't know. Either one, it's okay, right? But these are the snot dripping cries that he's doing here. Because when you hear the bad news of Jerusalem like Nehemiah did, and you know about the glory days of Jerusalem, and that is where he's from. And that is part of the promised land. And it's in disrepair. You get overwhelmed with emotion, and you can't do anything but sit down and weep for the condition and the state of Jerusalem. Now, I can imagine him, he's 1,000 miles away, and he gets told these, and his mind starts playing back some of the stories he's heard about some kings. King David, right? Dancing in the streets, naked, and he's worshiping God. Right? Then his son Solomon builds this temple, and it's glorious. How many of us have read that part? They use the best of the best stuff. They don't use cheap stuff. The wiring is not cheap in there, I can tell you that. Unlike this place here. You can plug in anything in the temple and it'd be fine. It wouldn't go, oh, whoa, got to rebuild that one. All their lights work. Unlike that one over there. And they used the best quality of the best quality stuff, and it was glorious because they felt God deserved it, something like that. And I can imagine him going through the stories and then looking at the reality. How sad, how pathetic, how embarrassing it is. So how do you respond? Well, you can either say, it's no big deal, it's someone else's job. I'm Nehemiah, I'm 1,000 miles away, somebody else will do it. Or you could be like Jerusalem. And he says, I'm not waiting for someone else to rebuild, restore, and revive the city of Jerusalem. Somebody has to do something about it, and that somebody might as well be me. Okay? Now, he allows his heart to be touched by God, but he allows his emotions to be touched. The question I had this week, what breaks your heart? What breaks your heart? I kind of randomly asked people, even they were not Christians. Especially, I asked non-Christians at work. I didn't tell them what I was doing, but I said, hey, on a normal day, what what makes your heart, what gets you angry? What breaks your heart? And a few people, they said, kids that are neglected, right? Someone said, wives that are beat. Someone said, and this is, I could see this, kids in other countries, they're dying because there's not any clean water. Somebody's seen the commercial, right? And someone's seen that commercial and they started crying because they use the saddest music in the world when they play those things. And it's like, oh, that song is so sad. And then you turn it and you go to other things. But these are all those things I agree with, 100%. And a lot of those, they break my heart. And I asked God recently, God, I don't want to turn a blind eye to the things that you're responding to right now, the needs of people. I want you, God, to break my heart in the areas that your heart is breaking. I want you to touch the emotions that you have, God, Jesus cried. Jesus wept. He was a man with emotion. He wasn't a robot, okay? I believe that God has emotion. He created it. So I asked God, break my heart, break your heart, God. I want it to be the same way. And I started thinking about it. I said, okay, as a pastor, something makes me angry all the time. And I can't stand it. You know what it is? The church in America, there's hardly any new converts. There's hardly any new people who are going from, hey, I'm running away from God, to, God, I serve you, I live for you. I'm talking about conversions, true, legitimate conversions. There's not a lot going on. You notice that? Nobody's walking in our doors, knocking on the door saying, what must they do to be saved? Right? Nobody is, we can't just sit here and go, they'll show up. Wrong. And it just makes me mad because the longer I'm in Nehemiah, the more I talk with people, the more I'm at Pepsi doing my work, and I get to overhear conversations, the more I realize that it's getting harder and harder to reach people in the flesh. Of course, the Spirit can do anything He wants. But in the flesh, it's getting harder and harder. People are more cynical. People are more stubborn. People are more, I don't really need God. There's, atheism is rampant. Especially agnosticism. If people, they believe in a higher power, but they don't know how to know Him, so they don't serve Him. It's huge. Right? And it breaks my heart because Jesus died on the cross for all people. And some churches they sit back with their Bible studies, their hymn sings, their game night, and they ignore the lost. And it makes me mad, right? I mean, I wish I had the arms that Popeye had, but, I want the spinach, and I want to shoot the spinach in my mouth, and I want to be able to get mad, and I can't stand any longer. Somebody has to do something, and that somebody must be me. It needs to be me. I'm talking about it should be all of us saying that, not just me. Okay? It needs to be all of us. We need to have that moment. We need to sit down, cry for the things that really bother us. And you know what bothers me? Like I just said, people who die and go a Christless eternity, and no one told them about Jesus. No one. I mean, that bothers me. It always has. But lately, it really eats my heart. It's just killing it. Because they don't even know they need Jesus, but at the end of their lives, I really believe that when they're in hell, they're going to go, why? Why? Didn't someone tell me? I had no idea. I had no idea that there was a way out. I didn't know that there was a way that I could be saved. I didn't know. No one told me. Now, what breaks your heart? You don't have to say it now. It could be that, but it could be something else. Well, kids that, they don't have enough food in their homes. That really breaks my heart. We'll do something about it. Right? I'm not just talking about this kind of thing. I'm talking about anything that breaks your heart. Be part of. Take the authority. Take the leadership. And do it. Don't wait for someone else to do it, okay? So, somebody has to do something, and that somebody might as well be me. Ordinary people change the world. They sit down to cry. And number 2, they kneel down to pray. Boy, this is some deep, deep stuff. Not really. This is stuff like, yeah, Pastor, duh, right? What are we doing? Some churches don't pray. Some churches don't. They don't pray. They don't seek the face of God. Some Christians don't. They're too busy. Sometimes, and I'm going to say this in the right way, hopefully. Sometimes prayer seems like you're wasting your time. Okay? Because you're not seeing results right away. You're like, what's the point? Come on, you've thought that, haven't you? Right? If things are happening right now, right in front of my eyes, what's the point? You thought it, and I've thought it. And the reality is, it's never a waste of time. It's never a waste of time. That is why we started doing some prayer meetings around here. That's why Tuesdays, 6 a.m., it's early. It's early. I can't lie. Half the time I'm kind of getting the sleep out of my eye and praying at the same time. I can't lie. But I kid you not, after we're done with it, it's like we're ready to conquer this world, right? You know, I'm ready to go to Pepsi right now and get angry at the Pepsi. And no, I'm not. I'm ready. And that's why we do that. That's why Thursdays, 6:30 p.m., that's why we're praying. We're not wasting our time. We're not just, oh, this is nice. This is something that Nehemiah did. He prayed. He knelt down to pray. Look at the very first thing after weeping. For some days, say days. That's a long prayer. Wow. Dear Jesus, fix these walls. Amen. Jesus, heal my heart. Amen. These are days. For some days I mourned and I fasted and I prayed before the God of heaven. Days. This is not a Lord bless me kind of thing. This is not just a thing. This is days. This is effort. This is I'm gonna pray and I'm not gonna pray for immediate results. This is hard work. This is hard work. God, have your way in this place. You know what? If I don't see immediate results, I'm not going to let that discourage me. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to fast. I'm going to pray. And you know what? If you say, what can I do? I'm just a person from a small church, small town. Anybody can pray. Can you imagine? I'm sure you do pray. Can you imagine the results? Each one of us pray together. Can you imagine what can be rebuilt? Can you imagine what can be restored? Can you imagine what can be revived if all of us prayed? Now, again, how long did it take them to rebuild the wall? 52 days. What can be done here in 52 days? What can be done right here in 52 days? Well, Pastor, you're asking a little bit. No. See, that's not what Nehemiah did. He didn't go, I can't do that. It's too scary. No. He rolled up his sleeves. He prayed. He sought the face of God. He fasted. He prayed. You know what? Everything that Nehemiah did later in the book was bathed in prayer. Everything. And I want to make this very clear. There was two things that he did. He prayed and he acted. He prayed and he did. Okay, he prayed and he was willing to get his hands dirty. He prayed and he did some hard work. Okay? He was willing to pray and do hard work. He was willing to pray and do whatever it took to see that the walls get rebuilt. He was willing to do both. He was not willing just to rebuild the wall and not pray. That would be dangerous, by the way. If you do stuff outside of praying, please don't. That's dangerous. You're doing it in your own power. It's minimizing what could be done. And I want to say this next statement very carefully so I don't sound like a heretic. But if all you're doing is praying and you're not acting, you're not doing, that's not what God's calling us to do. Some people, praying is all we do. No. Sometimes you got to stop the prayer meeting. Sometimes you have to end and go do. That's why, when we're done with the prayer meeting, that's why I go to work. Because I have to act. I have to do what God's called me to do. That's what Nehemiah did. He prayed and he acted. And those two things are powerful. And because of his prayers, the walls of Jerusalem was rebuilt in only 52 days. That's a miracle. Now, last one. is the ordinary people who change the world. They sit down to cry, they kneel to pray, and then last, they stand up to act. Obviously, you're praying as you're doing, okay? I'm not saying you stop praying literally. But you roll up your sleeves. Whatever it is that's broken your heart, whatever it has caused you to start weeping, whatever has caused you to kneel down in prayer, whatever it is, you start rolling up your sleeves and you start acting. You start doing what God's called you to do. That's your calling. See, Nehemiah stopped the prayer meeting and he went to King Artaxerxes and he had boldness. And he asked King Artaxerxes, I need your help. I need your permission. I need your resources. That's bold to ask King Artaxerxes. But I really think that King Artaxerxes had a good heart. I mean, in a sense. Because of how he looked at Nehemiah, and how did he respond to Nehemiah when he watched him? He said, dude, there's something up with you. Are you okay? He wouldn't have acted like that if he was super evil. Okay? When he saw Nehemiah come into his presence with some wine, and he noticed that he'd been crying. And King Artaxerxes says, what's going on? Can you talk to me? And I love that little tidbit of the story makes me go, Artaxerxes, well, I don't think he was like a Christian, I think that I don't know, maybe Nehemiah impacted him in a certain way, just by the way he lived. I think that's what happened. But who knows, that's speculating. But in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 3 through 5, this is the great principle of buttering up authority. Okay? What do I mean by that? Well, he says, I said to the king, may the king live forever. That's buttering him up to what he's saying later, by the way. Hey, it's in the Bible, so we can butter up people like that, right? Of importance. And so he goes, why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? The king said to me, I love this, what the king did. What is it that you want? God's going to use some very strange people that you would never expect him to use. Happens all the time. And what is it that you want? Now, pause right there. How do you respond? Well, look what he does. I prayed. Say prayed. I prayed to the God of heaven. This is not a prayer meeting like I'm going down on my knees now. This is just a quick little, God, what do I need? What should I ask for? And so he quickly prays, and I answered the king, if it pleases the king and your servant has found favor in his sight, let the king send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it. So that, who? I. Now, obviously, there's more people. We'll see it later. There's a lot more people that help him. This is not just hey, I'm Superman, I can do anything I want, I'm going to do it all myself. This is not the Lone Ranger. But he was willing to take the responsibility. He was willing to take the leadership. He was willing to take the initiative and go, I'm going to make sure that I can rebuild Jerusalem because it's in ruins. He's not going to wait for other people. He's not going to whine about it. He's not going to complain about it. He's not going to say, why won't somebody do something about this? He says, I can't stand it any longer. I can't stand it no longer. Somebody has to do something. And it might as well be me. I'm not going to wait for the people over here. I'm not going to wait for the people over there. I'm not going to wait for the people here. I'm not going to wait for the people here. I'm not going to wait for anyone else because they might not be on board with it. It might not be their burden. But it might as well be me. You cannot do everything, right? You cannot do everything, but you can do something. I can't do everything, but I can do something. We can do something. And when you get your something and you get your something, and we all get our somethings together, guess what happens? The wall of Jerusalem gets rebuilt in 52 days. And I love that. Now, as we close, this is the beginning of the sermon series. It gets better. This is just introduction. This is the light the fire underneath you. surprised that you're still sitting. Anyway, I'm just kidding. I mean, who are the Nehemiahs around here? Who are the people that are willing to put their foot down in their lives? Say, enough's enough. Enough's enough. I hate to see the walls in my life torn down. I hate to see it in disrepair. I hate to see it where it's not complete. Look at that. There's a gap right here. There's a gap between these two. I cannot stand it any longer. I need God to rebuild my life. I want God to restore my heart. I want God to restore my joy. I want God to restore my peace. I look back in my life, God, and it used to be this way, and there were the glorious days, and now I'm a shadow of my former self, and I can't stand any longer. When it comes to this series, there are personal things that's going to happen in my life, in the life of the church, because of the things that bother me. But for you, when you are a Nehemiah, you're not going to look like everybody else. It's not a cookie-cutter Nehemiah. But the things that God is laying upon your heart, the things that really matter, at some point you need to put your foot down and say, you know what? Enough's enough. I refuse to let somebody else. I'm not waiting for someone else. I'm not waiting for a leader in this church. I'm not waiting for someone to do it. Somebody has to do something, and then somebody might as well be me. I want you to close your eyes as we pray. You don't need to raise your hand for this, but I need you to respond in your heart to God. Are you a Nehemiah? Are you willing to be a Nehemiah? Are you willing to be a Nehemiah? Are you willing to see the things around you, and maybe they're in disrepair, it's embarrassing, it's broken, it's empty, whatever the case may be in your life? And are you willing, as an ordinary cupbearer in your life, to stand up and say, enough's enough? I can't stand it any longer. Somebody has to do something, and that somebody might as well be me. If that's you, just respond in your heart to God right now and say, God, I'm willing to be a Nehemiah. I'm willing to be a person who will weep, who will mourn, who will fast, who will pray. I'm willing to be a person that's going to serve God with everything. Now, if that's you, I promise you some results here. If that's you, if you live your life that way, if you live like Nehemiah, you will get Nehemiah results. What I mean by that is you start seeing things in your life being rebuilt, whatever they may be. You may see some restoration, which is cool. Relationships are going to be restored. Your relationship with God is going to go in places it's never gone before. And you're going to see revival in your own heart and in your sphere of influence. You're going to see some revival in this church. God has spoke to me clearly about these things, but it's going to start with a remnant. It's going to start with us, who are willing to be like Nehemiah. We will not let discouragement bring us down. We'll not let depression. We'll not let anger. We'll not let frustration. We'll not let bitterness. We'll not let apathy. We'll not let anything hinder us from doing the things that God's called us to do. We are willing to roll up our sleeves when we pray, when we seek the face of God, when we weep, when we mourn, when we fast, when we're kneeling at the altar, wherever it is, we're willing to roll up our sleeves and see that God's will be done on this earth as it is in heaven. That's what we're willing to do. That's what a Nehemiah does. That's who you and I are called to be. And the churches in this city, the churches in this community, it might look different. There might be people that show up next week and they don't want to hear about it. They don't want to do what's being told in the book of Nehemiah. They like the apathy. They like the bitterness. They like the depression. They like the sorrow. They like all that because it's comfortable. And I'm praying that there'd be a remnant of people who would be raised up like Nehemiah and put their foot down and seek the face of God. And they're going to see the Nehemiah results. They're going to see the wall of Jerusalem in their lives be rebuilt in 52 days. It's going to be a miracle, and people are going to be restored. There's going to be revival. There's going to be repentance. There's going to be restoration. There's going to be a rebuilding. There's going to be a new season for our lives. As we close, we're closing really soon, in a moment. I want you to be able to feel in your heart what I've felt in my heart all week. And I want you to feel what's been on Nehemiah's heart when he was talking about this. There was something that bubbled up inside of him. There was something that it was something that just moved his spirit to do something about it. And it was like this sermon when I was doing this sermon, and there was something in my heart that was being stirred. It was bubbling up. There was this fire. There was this flame that was in my heart, and there was something that it was just too much to bear. That I had to do something about it. It was very difficult to wait until this morning to preach this sermon. I could have preached it the day I was going through it. And I want you so desperately to feel that same thing in your heart, because when you feel that burden in your heart, when you feel the heat of God in your heart, when you feel something bubble up inside, there's something that needs to be done, and you are willing to stand up and say, I want to do what God has called me to do. And that all begins with doing what Nehemiah did. Seeking the face of God. Praying. Fasting, weeping, mourning, repenting. All the things that he did, and he saw amazing results. And it's the thing that God wants to do today in the church. In this church, this congregation, and the church in this community, and the church around the world. God wants to bring revival. Do you think that God only wants to bring revival to one congregation in some other part of this world or this other part of the country? No, he wants to bring revival right to this small town. Why? So we can make a name for ourselves? No. Because he came, sent his son Jesus to die for the world. And there's a lot of the world left. There's a lot of the people who are not Christ followers yet. And I pray that each one of us in this room, each one of you, feel something in your heart, just a little, even if it's just a little bit. Even if I was able to sow a small seed in your heart for the week, and it's going to grow and it's going to become something big. I pray that even if it was just a small seed of encouragement, a small seed of, oh, there's something that could happen here. And a small seed of dreaming, and a small seed of having a vision, and a small seed of encouragement. I hope and I pray that something in your heart has been happening. Because I know I feel it in my heart. Let's stand and pray. Jesus. 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 Just take a moment right now. Just take a moment. something in your heart? Don't you feel something stirred in your soul? Don't you feel a fire starting to burn in your heart? Honestly, if you're here and you're like, I don't feel a thing in my heart, that's fine. I've been there a million trillion times. And all I can ask of you for this week is just to seek God. That's all I can ask. And there's nothing wrong with you. It's not something that you haven't done or you've done. It's just sometimes we don't feel those kind of things. But right now, God, stir our hearts. Stir our hearts. Stir our hearts, God. God, fan into flame that spark that might be happening in each of our heart. Fan into flame the call of God that you've placed upon each one of us. Fan into flame the revival that you want to bring to this land. Fan into flame the restoration that you want to happen here. Fan into flame the rebuilding season, God. I believe with all my heart we're in the rebuilding season. I believe that when we rebuild this place, when we see restoration, when we see victory, when we see all those things, God, that the lost are going to be saved. Because it's going to be contagious. And God, I know it's going to happen sooner rather than later because of what happened in Nehemiah's day. It is not something that we need to wait for, but the results are going to be long-lasting. And Father, to be honest with you, to pick this weekend to do this message, it bothered me when I came here because I want everyone to hear it. And I think that this weekend was perfect in my heart because of what we're going to see in the coming weeks. We're going to be amazed at the things that you have done. And it's not something that we can muster up ourselves. It's not something that we produce. It's not something that we do. God, it's going to be a move of God. And all we can do is stand and worship you. All we can do is praise you. All we can do is seek your face. And all we can do is go out to reach the lost and see that they're saved. That's all we can do, God. But you do the real work. You do the things that only you can do, God, and we do the things that we can do. And God, I believe we're going to see a rebuilding season like not seen since the day of Nehemiah. And God, we're going to see restoration. And it's not just for ourselves. That's greedy. We're going to see it for this community. We're going to see it for this world. And God, we're going to see revival. But not only for this place, because that's not enough. We need to see revival in this entire community. In every church, in every congregation, with every leader, with every congregation, with every congregant. We're going to see revival in every single church in this community, God. It's not just a Assembly of God thing. It's not just for us. We cannot keep it for ourselves. That's greedy. That's selfish. But it's for everybody. We thank you. God, I pray for the next few days. I pray that you would continue to stir something in our heart daily. I thank you. In Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. God bless you. We will see you on Tuesday at 6:30. 6, sorry. I know I'd be there at 6. I thought maybe they would notice and then get there later.